You know that feeling? You're uh, trying to figure out what's actually in your food or maybe your cleaning supplies.
Oh, yeah?
And you see this list of ingredients. Sounds more like a chemistry test than something you want to use.
Definitely. It's
It
overwhelming.
leaves you feeling a bit lost, right? You want to make good choices, but it's hard to know where to even begin.
I think a lot of people feel that way. There's
Yeah.
just so much information flying around and figuring out what's actually a concern versus what's maybe, hype.
Mm. It's
Mm,
tough. And that's precisely what we're digging into today. We're taking a deep dive into this thing called chemophobia.
hmm
Our main source for this is a document, chemophobia.pdf. It really helps frame the whole issue.
Yeah, it does. And our goal here is to, try and understand this common aversion to chemicals. Let's unpack the real concerns from maybe the misconceptions.
And hopefully get a clearer picture by the end.
Right. And, one thing the source throws out there right away is pretty surprising how much more we're exposed to natural chemicals compared to synthetic ones, like orders of magnitude more.
Like that 99.99% figure for pesticides we eat.
Right.
Yeah, that's staggering.
It really is.
Okay, so let's start there. What exactly is chemophobia? How does our source define it?
Well, it's described in a couple of ways. On one hand, it can just be a general dislike, maybe even a prejudice against chemistry or chemicals.
Okay.
But then you have IUPAC, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, kind of the global authority that they define it more strongly as an irrational fear of chemicals.
Irrational. That's interesting. Does that mean it's completely baseless?
It suggests, I think, that the fear often doesn't line up with the actual measurable risk.
Right.
The American Council on Science and Health sort of builds on this. They see it as this fear, often focused on synthetic stuff, that gets fueled by, scare stories you see around.
Right, right. And the source makes this really crucial point, the whole idea of a chemical-free product. It's impossible.
Completely impossible. I mean, everything is chemicals.
Mm.
Water, air, us.
Everything.
Exactly. Michelle Franco puts it in a really interesting way. She suggests that the word chemical has almost become shorthand for it. Artificial, maybe impure, hazardous, toxic. And she uses this analogy comparing chemophobia to color blindness. Like, people become blind to the vast majority of chemicals they interact with every single day.
Color blindness to chemicals. I like that. Can you elaborate a bit?
Yeah, her point is that someone with chemophobia might fixate on, say, a specific preservative or additive they think is bad,
Uh-huh.
while totally ignoring the basic chemical reality of everything else.
Mm.
Like, do you worry about the chemicals in your organic apple as much as you might worry about, I don't know, BPA in plastic? Probably not. But the apple is full of chemicals, too.
Right. Natural ones, but still chemical.
Exactly. And she warns that these misunderstandings, this kind of blindness, can actually lead to harmful decisions.
Like the example about water fluoridation.
Precisely. She points out how opposition, often based on these unfounded fears, ignores overwhelming evidence about fluoride's benefits for dental health. It shows how this chemophobia isn't just an abstract idea. It can have real public health consequences.
Okay, so we've got a handle on what it is. Now, where does it come from? What are the roots? And how did it, grow so prevalent?
Well, the source suggests it's kind of a mix. On one side, there are definitely legitimate, reasonable concerns about the potential negative effects of some synthetic chemicals. We have a history there, right? Industrial accidents, pollution.
Absolutely. You can't dismiss that history.
No, you can't. But then there's also this element of maybe less rational fear, often tied to misunderstandings, especially around things like cancer risk.
And that's where marketing often steps in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Those natural and chemical-free labels you see everywhere, they tap right into that feeling.
Yeah.
Sets up this false choice,
Yeah.
Natural equals good and safe. Chemical equals bad and dangerous. It's very effective marketing, but often misleading.
Pierre Laszlo, mentioned in the source, connects it to both those irrational ideas and real historical fears.
Yeah, he does. He brings up things like chemical warfare, major industrial disasters like Bhopal. These are powerful, terrifying events that understandably create negative associations with the word chemical.
Deeply ingrained fears.
Sure. And Gordon Gribble points to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring as maybe an early spark for this wider public concern. And then later events like Times beach contamination in Bhopal really amplified it.
So those big events cemented the negative view.
It seems like it. They really damaged public trust, not just in the chemical industry, but maybe in regulators too. And it solidified chemical as potentially harmful, while natural got this sort of halo effect, pure, safe.
Yeah.
even if that wasn't always scientifically accurate.
It's quite a shift in perception, and the source even mentions the chemical industry itself kind of responding by using biotechnology more for things like flavors, almost to avoid the chemical label.
Yeah, that's a telling move, isn't it? Shows how powerful that public perception is. And the document suggests this isn't just a fringe thing. Chemophobia seems to be, well, growing.
Described as maybe even reaching epidemic levels in the U.S. public. That's quite a statement.
It is strong language. John Entine offers a perspective on why it might be growing. He links it partly to our amazing ability now to detect tiny, tiny amounts of substances.
Ah, so we can find things we couldn't before.
Exactly. We can detect chemicals in parts per billion, even trillion. But, Entine suggests, our public understanding of what those minuscule amounts actually mean for health hasn't kept up. We get alarmed by the detection, even if the amount is far below any level known to cause harm.
So more awareness of traces, but maybe not the context of risk.
That seems to be the argument. And Entine also ties this into the precautionary principle, especially in agriculture.
How does that connect?
Well, the precautionary principle basically says, if you suspect harm, even without proof, take precautions, which sounds sensible.
Yeah, on the surface.
But Entine argues that if you apply it too broadly in farming, driven by chemophobia, you might restrict potentially beneficial chemicals, maybe safer pesticides, just because of a potential risk. This could force farmers to use older, maybe less effective, or even environmentally worse options, and could even impact food production down the line.
So there are potential downsides to being overly cautious based on fear rather than evidence. What about that UK initiative, Sense About Science?
Right, they targeted celebrities with a leaflet. The idea was to point out that, look, everyone carries tiny amounts of various chemical baggage, they called it.
Yeah, chemical baggage.
Yeah, and being able to detect this stuff is just because our analytical tech is so good now, not necessarily because we're all in immediate danger.
Okay, this brings us nicely to a really key part of the source, comparing natural versus synthetic chemicals. It sounds like the Carcinogenic Potency Project has some pretty eye-opening findings here.
Oh, definitely. This project, it's run out of the US EPA, started way back in the 80s. Their mission was basically to test both natural and synthetic chemicals systematically for their potential to cause cancer.
Why was that needed?
Because there was this huge imbalance. Synthetic chemicals were getting almost all the attention, all the testing, while naturally occurring chemicals were mostly just ignored in terms of carcinogenicity testing.
Right. So what did they find? That 1992 Science article seems key.
Absolutely. One massive takeaway is just the sheer volume difference. We are exposed to vastly more natural chemicals every day than synthetic ones.
Okay, quantify that for us.
Well, think about burnt stuff from cooking, grilling, toasting. The average intake is maybe around 2,000 milligrams a day. Then natural pesticides, chemicals plants make to protect themselves, we ingest about 1,500 milligrams daily.
Okay. And synthetic pesticide residues.
The estimate, about 0.09 milligrams per day.
Wow. Okay, wait. 2,000 plus 1,500 versus zero point 0.09.
Yeah, the difference is enormous. The project estimated that something like 99.99% of the pesticides we ingest are actually natural ones produced by the plants themselves.
99.99%. That just completely flips the common narrative, doesn't it?
It really does. But despite this huge difference in exposure, guess what gets tested most for causing cancer in lab animals?
Let me guess. The synthetic ones.
You got it. Around 79% of the chemicals tested in rats and mice were synthetic.
So the focus is almost inverse to the exposure level.
Pretty much. And another big finding challenges that idea that, we've evolved specific defenses just for natural toxins in our food.
Ah, the natural is okay because we're used to its argument.
Exactly. The researchers argue our detoxification systems are mostly general. They're inducible, meaning the body ramps them up when exposed to low doses of various substances, whether they're cooked up in a lab or in a plant.
So our bodies don't necessarily distinguish between low doses of natural or synthetic in terms of basic defense mechanisms.
That's the argument, and maybe the most surprising part. When they actually did the tests,
Yeah.
the rate at which both natural and synthetic chemicals caused cancer in rodents was about the same, roughly 50% for both groups tested.
50%. So half the natural chemicals they tested were rodent carcinogens, same as synthetic ones.
At the high doses used in those tests, yes.
Okay.
Which leads to a pretty stark implication.
Which is?
If we're exposed to vastly more natural chemicals by weight and number, and roughly half of those tested cause cancer in rodents.
Then we're exposed to a huge background level of natural rodent carcinogens all the time.
Exactly. They found, for instance, that out of 57 natural pesticides tested, 29 were rodent carcinogens, and those 29 show up in over 50 common foods, fruits, vegetables.
So the stuff we think of as healthy fruits, veggies likely contain naturally occurring pesticides that can cause cancer in rodents at high doses.
It certainly challenges the simple natural equals safe idea.
Mm.
And Philip Abelson, who is the editor of Science, argued that this focus on high-dose animal testing itself fuels chemophobia
How so?
by creating what he called phantom hazards. We get fixated on these results from high-dose rodent tests, often involving trace amounts of synthetics, and it might distract us from bigger, more established health risks like smoking or poor diet.
Hmm. So we chase these tiny potential risks from synthetics while maybe ignoring the massive background of natural substances, some of which show similar effects in lab tests.
That's a key takeaway, I think. Now, shifting gears slightly to public perception, the European survey mentioned in the source is quite revealing.
What does show?
Pretty high levels of anxiety. Around 30% of people said they were actually scared of chemical substances.
A third. Wow.
Yeah, and 40% said they actively try to avoid chemicals daily. Even more striking, maybe, is that 39% said they wish they could live in a world that was totally chemical-free.
Which, as we established, is
Just
impossible.
Scientifically impossible, yeah. It just highlights how deep these feelings run. And it connects back to Frankel's point about fluoridation. These feelings can lead to opposing things that are actually beneficial.
Right. The source also touches on why natural things might feel safer, doesn't it?
It does. It mentions this psychological tendency where if humans didn't make it, it feels safer. There's a sort of inherent suspicion of the unnatural or synthetic.
Even if the natural substance could be quite dangerous, like certain plant toxins or fungal contaminants.
Exactly. It's a bias,
Yeah.
right? We fear the synthetic chemical we barely understand, but maybe happily accept a known natural hazard because, because it's natural. It's a fascinating quirk of perception.
Okay, so given this complex picture, real history, misconceptions, psychological biases, what does the source suggest we can actually do about chemophobia?
Well, the main things mentioned are pretty broad. Better chemical education and more public outreach.
So tackling the knowledge gap?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is that if people understand the basics better, what chemicals are, how dose matters, the natural synthetic context, it might help counter some of the fear and encourage a more, evidence-based view.
Helping people see that chemical isn't a synonym for poison and natural isn't always safe.
Precisely. Though the source does also add a note of realism, acknowledging that some chemophobia probably has economic or political drivers too.
Ah, so it's not just about science communication.
Likely not entirely. Addressing it fully might need to look at those wider factors as well.
This has been really insightful digging into chemophobia.pdf. If we were to boil it down, what are the main takeaways for listeners?
I'd say first, chemophobia is complex. It mixes valid caution about some chemicals with a lot of misunderstandings, often amplified by, various sources. Second, that simple line between natural and synthetic is really blurry when it comes to risk. Natural doesn't automatically mean safe. Synthetic doesn't automatically mean dangerous.
And the sheer amount of natural chemicals we encounter dwarfs our exposure to synthetics. That 99.99% pesticide figure is hard to forget.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Most pesticides we eat are made by the plants themselves.
Definitely challenges your gut feelings. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Michelle Frankel made that point. Every substance in the universe is a chemical.
So if that's true, what would a truly chemical-free world actually look like? Is that even a coherent idea? And what might we lose or maybe unexpectedly gain if we seriously tried to pursue that impossible goal? Something to chew on, perhaps?